The Silent Conquest. Admiral Krev Thorne stood on the command bridge of the Vizari flagship Indomitable Will, his forearms clasped behind his back as he watched Earth burn. The blue-green planet was marred by smoldering impact sites, the aftermath of the Vizari battle fleet's synchronized orbital bombardment. His outer eyes blinked with satisfaction, while his central eye remained fixed on the main view screen. "Status report," he commanded, voice resonating through his chest cavity with the distinctive harmonic undertones of Vizari authority. 98% of targeted military installations neutralized. "Admiral," responded Sub-Commander Zell, her scales shifting to a pleased amber hue. "Human command structure has collapsed. Resistance is minimal and disorganized. Victory parameters achieved with negligible casualties to our forces." Krev Thorne allowed himself a low, rumbling laugh. "Negligible? You mean 0 casualties, Sub-Commander." He turned to face his bridge crew, all 14 officers standing at attention at their crystalline consoles. 3 standard cycles. That's all it took to bring this supposedly dangerous species to its knees. The Vizari Interstellar Command had spent decades observing humanity from afar. Their analysis had been thorough. Earth's communication networks provided a wealth of information about human military capabilities, political structures, and social dynamics. The Directorate's conclusion had been unanimous. Despite humanity's rapid technological advancement, their inherent divisiveness made them vulnerable. The Directorate's strategy was flawless. Krev Thorne continued, reciting the traditional victory litany. As always, the bridge crew responded in practiced unison. Earth had been considered a potential threat. The upstart species had advanced from primitive flight to rudimentary space travel in a mere century, an alarming rate of development that had caught the attention of the Vizari Directorate. Better to eliminate the threat now, they reasoned, than face a technologically mature human civilization in a few decades. The operation had been executed with precision. Simultaneous strikes on military installations, communication hubs, and government centers across the planet. No warning, no declaration of war, no opportunity for the humans to demonstrate their supposed adaptability. Just overwhelming force applied with surgical precision. "Prepare the landing parties," Krev Thorne ordered. "I want prisoners, military leaders, scientists, political figures. The high-value targets on our acquisition list." He turned back to the view screen, watching as shuttles began descending through Earth's atmosphere. "Someone prepare my speech for their formal surrender," he added with a confident flick of his secondary appendages. "Let's be magnanimous. After all, the Vizari Dominion values mercy almost as much as it values efficiency." Little did Admiral Krev Thorne know that the most fundamental rule of warfare was about to slap him across all 3 of his smugly blinking eyes. The descent to Earth was smooth, disappointingly so. Krev Thorne had expected some last-ditch resistance, anything to justify further displays of Vizari military might. But there was nothing. No missiles, no aerial counterattacks, not even primitive ground weapons, just silence. "Landing zone secure, Admiral," reported Ground Commander Vextrine as Krev Thorne stepped off the shuttle ramp onto actual Earth soil. "Local military presence neutralized. We're encountering only scattered civilian presence, most in hiding." "Excellent. Proceed with Phase 2, Krev Thorne ordered, inhaling deeply through his sensory slits. Nitrogen, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and something else. The distinctive scent of mammalian fear. Delicious. The landing site had once been a major human military headquarters in a region called Colorado. Now it was a smoking crater with a few structural elements still standing. Perfect symbolism for humanity's fallen pride. "Round up any survivors," Krev Thorne commanded as he strode forward. "I want high-value targets identified and separated. We've already secured several promising specimens." "Admiral," Vextrine reported, leading him to a makeshift holding area where approximately 30 humans were being kept under guard. Most were in various states of shock, dirty, injured, broken in spirit. Some wept openly, a display of weakness that made Crevthorne's throat sac inflate with amusement. But one human stood apart from the others, a female in what remained of a military uniform, her posture straight despite her bound hands. Captain Sarah Chen, Vextrine announced, checking his data tablet. Strategic Operations Commander, North American Defense Coalition. Crevthorne approached the human, towering over her by nearly 2 head lengths. She looked up at him, face bloody but eyes clear and focused. There was no fear in those eyes, only something the Admiral found difficult to interpret. Captain Chen. Crevthorne pronounced the alien syllables carefully. I must congratulate you on surviving our initial assault. Not many of your colleagues were so fortunate. Admiral, she replied simply, with a slight nod that seemed almost respectful. Crevthorne circled her slowly, puzzled by her composure. You know, we studied your species extensively before this invasion. Your history, psychology, physiology. Do you know what we found most interesting? Chen remained silent, watching him with those unsettlingly calm eyes. Your delusions, Crevthorne continued, leaning closer. Your species' persistent belief that you are somehow special in this galaxy, that you would rise to any challenge, that you would, against all odds, prevail. He gestured around at the devastation surrounding them. Where is that famous human spirit now, Captain? Where is your cavalry, your reinforcements, your miracle solution? Chen's eyes flicked briefly to something over Crevthorne's shoulder, but her expression revealed nothing. Rule number 1. Admiral, she said quietly. What? Crevthorne's central eye narrowed. Nothing. A ghost of a smile touched her lips before disappearing. Just an old Earth saying. Take her to the command ship, Crevthorne ordered, straightening up. Her and any others identified as leadership. I want full neurological scans and memory extraction. If there are any human resistance plans still in motion, I want to know about them. As Chen was led away, Crevthorne couldn't help but notice something peculiar about her expression. It wasn't the look of someone defeated. It wasn't even the look of someone defiant in the face of inevitable doom. It was the look of someone waiting. The detention level of the indomitable will was designed to break spirits as much as to contain bodies. The lighting oscillated at frequencies specifically calculated to disrupt human circadian rhythms. The temperature fluctuated between uncomfortably warm and bone-chillingly cold. Even the gravity was manipulated to be slightly stronger than Earth standard, enough to wear down prisoners physically over time. None of this seemed to bother the human in cell block 7G. Prisoner continues to display anomalous behavior, reported Chief Interrogator Mav Lunt, her normally steady voice tinged with frustration. Subject identified as Captain Sarah Chen. Crevthorne reviewed the surveillance footage with growing irritation. Unlike the other captured humans who showed appropriate levels of despair, Chen was humming. Yes, humming some Earth melody while doing what appeared to be physical exercises in her cell. What information have you extracted from her? Crevthorne demanded. Mav Lunt's secondary eyes blinked rapidly, a sign of embarrassment. That's the concerning part, Admiral. We've applied standard neural extraction techniques, utilized chemical interrogation, even employed psychological pressure points based on our research of human behavioral weaknesses. She's given us nothing of value. Nothing. Impossible. The extraction devices cannot be resisted. She doesn't resist exactly. She cooperates. Too much. Offers information freely. Then what's the problem? The information is useless. Military cafeteria menus. Lyrics to something called pop songs. Detailed explanations of human recreational activities like fantasy football and knitting. Crevthorne growled, a low rumbling sound that caused his subordinate to take a step back. Bring her to me. Now. 20 minutes later, Captain Sarah Chen was escorted onto the bridge by 4 armed guards. Despite 5 days in captivity, the human looked remarkably composed. Her uniform was tattered and dirty, her face sported several bruises, but her posture remained straight, almost relaxed. Most disturbing to Crevthorne was her expression, a slight upward curve of the lips that humans called a smile. "Captain Chen," Krev Thorne began, intentionally using her title as a psychological tactic, "I trust your accommodations have been adequate." Chen glanced around the bridge, seemingly more interested in the technology than in Krev Thorne's intimidating presence. "Could use some better lighting. That pulsing thing you're doing is giving me a headache. And maybe a menu change. Your idea of food is creative." One of the guards struck her across the back, causing her to stumble slightly, but she straightened up again, that unsettling smile never leaving her face. "You seem remarkably upbeat for someone whose species has been conquered," Krev Thorne observed, circling her slowly. Chen shrugged. "Day's not over yet." A junior communications officer approached with visible reluctance, interrupting the exchange. "Admiral, we're receiving reports of incidents." "Incidents?" Krev Thorne's central eye swiveled toward the officer, while his outer eyes remained fixed on Chen. "Yes, sir. 3 of our forward operating bases have gone silent, and the orbital platform in Sector 6 is reporting unexplained system failures." "Resistance." Krev Thorne's voice rose in pitch, almost to a squeak of disbelief. "Unknown, sir, but there's more." The officer shifted uncomfortably. "The prisoners in detention blocks 3 through 5 are singing." "Singing." All 3 of Krev Thorne's eyes blinked in rapid succession, a sign of profound Vizari confusion. "Yes, Admiral. Some Earth composition called 'Don't Stop Believing.' It's quite rhythmic, and according to our cultural database, contains references to midnight trains and strangers waiting." Krev Thorne turned back to Chen, who was now grinning openly. "What is the meaning of this? What are your people planning?" "Planning? Nothing at all," Chen replied, her voice light and casual. "But you really should have studied us more carefully. You might have learned rule number 1. What is this rule you keep mentioning?" Krev Thorne demanded, his patience evaporating. Chen's smile faded, replaced by something harder, something ancient and dangerous. "Never corner something that evolved to thrive in adversity." As if on cue, the ship's alarms began to wail. Embers in the dark. The Vizari command ship, Indomitable, will shuddered as another explosion rocked its lower decks. Admiral Krev Thorne gripped the edge of the tactical display, his scales shifting to an agitated red pattern as he watched real-time updates from across the fleet. "How is this possible?" he hissed, slamming one of his lower arms against the console. "You told me human resistance was crushed." Strategic Officer Nevlorix's throat sac contracted nervously. "It was, Admiral. Their militaries were decimated, their command structures dismantled, their communications networks severed." "Then explain this." Krev Thorne gestured at the display where red warning indicators were multiplying across the 3-dimensional map of Earth and near-orbit space. No fewer than 17 Vizari forward operating bases were reporting attacks. 5 orbital platforms had gone dark. And most alarmingly, 3 support vessels had ceased all communications in the last hour. We believe these are isolated incidents, Admiral. Desperate actions by scattered survivors," Nevlorix offered, not sounding convinced himself. Krev Thorne's central eye narrowed. "Scattered survivors don't coordinate simultaneous attacks across 6 continents." The Admiral turned to where Captain Sarah Chen stood flanked by guards, watching the chaos unfold with that same maddening calmness. She'd been on the bridge when the first alarm sounded, and Krev Thorne had ordered her kept there, a decision he was beginning to reconsider. "What is this?" he demanded, advancing on her. "Some pre-planned contingency. Hidden weapons we didn't detect." Chen raised an eyebrow. "You destroyed most of our major military installations in your first strike, remember? Very thorough. Yet somehow your people are attacking my forces. Humans are resourceful," Chen replied with a shrug. "It's kind of our thing." Another alarm blared, and a communications officer called out, "Admiral, Ground Command reports that the human prisoners at the North American containment facility have escaped." Before Krev Thorne could respond, another officer spoke up. Sir, we're detecting numerous small craft launching from Earth's surface. They appear to be civilian vessels retrofitted with, we're not sure what exactly. Impossible, Krev Thorne muttered. We neutralized all military-grade propulsion technology on the planet's surface. Apparently not, sir, the officer replied, ducking her head submissively. These craft are utilizing some form of improvised propulsion we don't recognize. Krev Thorne's frustration boiled over. He rounded on Chen, looming over her with all his considerable height. Explain. Ever heard of MacGyver, Admiral? Chen asked, looking entirely too comfortable for a prisoner surrounded by hostile aliens. When Krev Thorne just stared at her in incomprehension, she continued. It's an old Earth reference. The point is, humans don't need high-tech equipment or fancy ships. Give us duct tape and paper clips, and we'll build whatever we need. This is absurd, Krev Thorne spat. No species can. Sir, a tactical officer interrupted. The human vessels are dispersing toward our orbital platforms. There, they appear to be on kamikaze trajectories. Kamikaze, a human military tactic, Chen supplied helpfully. Means we're going to ram those ships right down your throats. As if to punctuate her point, the entire ship rocked violently as something impacted the hull. Damage report, Krev Thorne roared. Hull breach on Deck 12, Sections 7 through 9, came the immediate response. Emergency force field containment active. What hit us? Krev Thorne demanded. A human commercial transport vessel, sir. Heavily modified and apparently filled with explosive fertilizer compounds. Chen actually laughed at that. Farming equipment. Resourceful. Krev Thorne's patience snapped. He seized Chen by the throat with one of his upper arms, lifting her partially off the ground. What is happening? How are your people coordinating without communication networks? Chen's feet dangled, but her voice remained steady. Who said we needed them? The plan was already in place. Has been for decades. What plan? Krev Thorne tightened his grip. Orbital. Defense initiative. Chen gasped out. Civilian. Preparedness protocols. We've been expecting something like this since we started, reaching for the stars. Krev Thorne released her, watching in disbelief as she rubbed her throat casually. You're saying your species had contingency plans for alien invasion before you even knew we existed? Admiral, humans prepare for everything, Chen explained, her voice slightly hoarse. Zombie apocalypse, nuclear winter, killer robots, alien invasions. We've imagined it all and planned for it. Not officially, maybe, but it's what we do. We envision worst-case scenarios and figure out how to survive them. Krev Thorne stepped back, suddenly seeing the human in a new light. Your entertainment media, he said slowly. All those simulations of disaster and invasion. They weren't just stories. Training manuals, Chen confirmed with a nod. Brain games, mental preparation. Been doing it for centuries. Admiral. The tactical officer's voice had risen an octave. We've lost contact with the landing forces in regions designated Europe and Australia. Krev Thorne turned to his second-in-command. Deploy the reserve combat units. All of them. To where, Admiral? The attacks are coming from everywhere. For the first time since the invasion began, uncertainty flickered across Krev Thorne's features. He looked back at the tactical display, at the spreading pattern of resistance. Not random, he now realized, but methodical. The humans were reclaiming territory in a precise, strategic pattern. Get me planetary surveillance, he ordered. I want to see what's happening on the surface. The main view screen flickered, showing satellite imagery of a region the humans called Siberia. What should have been a secured Vezeri landing zone was now a battleground. But the human forces weren't using military vehicles. They were using construction equipment, mining machinery, repurposed civilian aircraft. Switch to the European continent, Krev Thorne demanded. The image changed, showing similar scenes of improvised resistance. Somewhere in a place labeled Germany, humans had turned industrial chemical facilities into weapons manufacturing centers. In France, they converted high-speed rail networks into troop and supply transport systems. South America, Krev Thorne barked. More of the same. Farmers using agricultural equipment as weapons platforms, civilian drones retrofitted with explosive payloads, commercial satellites reprogrammed to track Visari movements. How? Krev Thorne whispered. How are they doing this without central command? Decentralized leadership, Chen answered as if the question had been directed at her. Distributed authority. We learned a long time ago not to put all our eggs in one basket. But your governments, your military headquarters, your communication centers, all destroyed. Window dressing, Chen said with a dismissive wave. The real planning, the contingencies, the backup systems, they were all established offline, locally, person to person, community by community. Old school. As if to demonstrate her point, the ship shuddered again as another explosion rattled through the lower decks. Admiral. A panicked voice called from the environmental control station. Someone has introduced an unknown compound into the ship's atmospheric system. Krev Thorne whirled. What compound? How? Unknown, sir. But it's affecting the crew on the lower decks. They're reporting disorientation and respiratory distress. Evacuate those decks and seal them off, Krev Thorne ordered. Then, to Chen. You're doing? She shook her head. I've been right here. But humans are adaptable. Someone probably studied your biology, figured out what would affect you. That's impossible. Your people have never encountered our species before. Probably worked it out from first principles, Chen suggested. We're good at that. Creative problem solving under pressure. It's our specialty. Krev Thorne stared at her, the full implications of what she was saying slowly dawning on him. The Visari had based their invasion strategy on the assumption that destroying human command structures would render the species helpless. They had failed to understand that humanity's true strength wasn't in their technology or their military might. It was in their adaptability, their creativity, their stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Sir, the communications officer interrupted his thoughts. We're receiving a transmission. From Earth. On screen. Krev Thorne ordered, his voice hollow. The view screen changed to show a human male in what appeared to be civilian clothing, not a military uniform or governmental attire, just ordinary garments. He stood in what looked like a simple office, not a command center. This is Dr. Marcus Hawkins, speaking on behalf of Earth's unified response. The human began without preamble. To the commander of the invading forces, we are prepared to negotiate terms for your immediate withdrawal from our planet and solar system. Krev Thorne stepped forward. This is Admiral Krev Thorne of the Visari Dominion. Your planet has been conquered. There will be no negotiations, only surrender. The human, Hawkins, smiled in a way that reminded Krev Thorne uncomfortably of Chen. Admiral, I think we both know that's not true. Your invasion force is facing coordinated resistance on every continent. Your ships are being damaged or destroyed in orbit. Your troops are encountering weapons and tactics they were not prepared for. Temporary setbacks, Krev Thorne insisted, though even to his own hearing, the words lacked conviction. No, Admiral. What you're experiencing is humanity's greatest strength, our ability to adapt, to innovate, to overcome. You studied our divisions, our conflicts, our apparent weaknesses, but you failed to understand our true nature. And what is that? Krev Thorne found himself asking. Hawkins leaned forward slightly. We thrive on adversity. We evolved on a planet that tried to kill us 1,000 different ways. We survived ice ages, plagues, natural disasters. We fought each other, learned from each other, pushed each other to be better, stronger, more resourceful. The human's expression hardened. Every time you knock us down, we get back up smarter. Every technology you use against us, we study, reverse engineer, and improve upon. Every advantage you think you have, we're already working to neutralize. Empty threats, Krev Thorne said, but his throat sac had contracted in what the Viseri officer corps would recognize as the first sign of doubt. Not threats, Admiral. Simple facts. Hawkins gestured, and the camera panned to show what appeared to be a laboratory, where humans in civilian clothing were examining what was unmistakably a disabled Viseri combat drone. Your technology is impressive, but not incomprehensible. Your weapons are powerful, but not unstoppable. Your strategy was sound, but incomplete. The camera returned to Hawkins. You have one standard Earth day to begin evacuation procedures. After that, we cannot guarantee the safety of any Viseri forces remaining in our solar system. The transmission cut off, leaving the bridge in silence. Krev Thorne turned slowly to find Captain Chen watching him with something that might have been pity. Rule number 1. Admiral, she said softly. Never corner something that evolved to thrive in adversity. Beyond the viewport, Earth continued to turn, the blue-green planet now alight with the fires of resistance, fires that were spreading, connecting, becoming an inferno that threatened to consume the Viseri invasion force entirely. And for the first time since the operation began, Admiral Krev Thorne felt something new. Rule number 1. The command bridge of the Indomitable Will was no longer the picture of Viseri efficiency it had been days earlier. Emergency lighting cast a dim red glow over the scene as officers rushed between stations, their movements sharp with panic rather than precision. Damage reports flooded in faster than they could be processed. The acrid smell of electrical fires permeated the filtered air. Admiral Krev Thorne stood before the main tactical display, watching with growing horror as more and more of his invasion force was systematically dismantled by what should have been a defeated species. Sir, Strategic Officer Nevalorix approached cautiously. We've lost contact with 67% of our ground forces. Orbital platform network is down. 8 support vessels confirmed destroyed. 3 more unresponsive. Krev Thorne's scales had paled to an ashen gray, the Viseri equivalent of a bloodless face. How? The humans, Nevalorix struggled to find the words. They're not fighting like any species we've encountered. They're using everything. Industrial chemicals as weapons. Commercial satellites reprogrammed to target our ships. They've even modified their primitive internal combustion vehicles into mobile attack platforms. And our prisoners. Most detention centers have been compromised. We estimate 80% of captured humans have been liberated. Krev Thorne's gaze drifted to where Captain Sarah Chen had been standing earlier. Her absence now felt like an accusation. She too had been freed during the chaos of the last few hours. The guards assigned to her found unconscious but unharmed. The Directorate was wrong, Krev Thorne murmured, almost to himself. We fundamentally misunderstood this species. The ship rocked violently as another impact struck the hull. The lights flickered, going out completely for several seconds before the emergency systems re-engaged. Admiral, a junior officer called out, voice tight with restrained panic. We're detecting multiple approaching vessels, civilian craft modified with our own technology. Impossible, Krev Thorne breathed, but even as he said it, he knew it wasn't. The humans had been capturing Viseri equipment, studying it, adapting it to their own use, all in a matter of days. They're hailing us, the communications officer announced. On screen, Krev Thorne ordered, straightening his posture. Whatever happened, he would face it with the dignity befitting a Viseri admiral. The view screen flickered to life, revealing a familiar face, Captain Sarah Chen, now dressed in what appeared to be a mix of her original uniform and scavenged Viseri armor. She stood in what was clearly the command center of one of the liberated human military bases, surrounded by a diverse group of humans in various attire, some military, some clearly civilian. Admiral Krev Thorne, Chen began, her tone almost conversational. I see you're having a bit of a rough day. Captain, Krev Thorne acknowledged stiffly. I assume you're calling to discuss terms of surrender. Chen smiled. That same infuriating smile he'd seen in the detention cell. Absolutely. We're ready to accept yours whenever you're prepared to offer them. A ripple of what might have been laughter passed through the humans visible on the screen behind her. Creth Thorne felt his throat sac inflate with indignation. "This is absurd," he sputtered. "You cannot possibly believe." "Admiral," Chen interrupted, her expression growing serious. "Let me be clear. In the last 72 hours, humanity has disabled or destroyed over half your invasion force, reverse-engineered your weapons technology, compromised your communication systems, and developed countermeasures to most of your tactical advantages." She leaned forward slightly. "We're not the primitive, divided species you thought we were. Yes, we fight amongst ourselves. Yes, we have our differences, but that's not weakness. It's how we evolved, how we improved, how we survived." Chen gestured to the diverse group behind her. "That scientist there. She was working on cancer treatments before your invasion. Now she's developing targeted bioweapons specifically designed for Viseri physiology. That teenager. He was programming video games last week. This week he cracked your encryption protocols. That grandmother. She's coordinating a network of civilian resistance fighters across 3 continents using nothing but ham radio and coded knitting patterns." Creth Thorne stared in disbelief. "This is not possible. No species adapts this quickly." "Humans do," Chen replied simply. "It's what we're best at. When pushed, when threatened, when backed into a corner, we don't just fight back, we innovate. We don't just resist, we reinvent. Every disadvantage becomes an opportunity. Every setback fuels our determination." Another human stepped into view, the male who had transmitted earlier, Dr. Hawkins. "Admiral, your invasion force arrived with a fundamental misunderstanding of what makes humans dangerous. It's not our technology or our military might. It's our adaptability, our creativity under pressure, our stubborn refusal to accept defeat. You studied our divisions," Chen continued, "but missed that those very divisions drove our progress. Different cultures, different perspectives, different approaches, all competing, collaborating, building on each other's successes, and learning from each other's failures." Creth Thorne's central eye narrowed. "And this, rule number 1 you mentioned. An old Earth saying," Chen explained. "Never corner something that evolved to thrive in adversity. You cornered humanity, Admiral. You backed us against the wall. And in doing so, you unlocked what makes us truly dangerous." The tactical display behind Creth Thorne updated with new warnings: more human vessels approaching, more Viseri assets lost. The inevitability of defeat settled over him like a physical weight. "What are your terms?" he asked quietly. "Complete withdrawal of all Viseri forces from our solar system," Chen stated firmly. "Return of all human prisoners. Full disclosure of all data collected on our species. And if we refuse..." Chen's expression hardened. "Then we continue what we've started. We've already begun adapting your faster-than-light technology to our vessels. Your weapons, your defenses, your communications. We're learning it all, improving it, making it our own. If you force us to come after you, Admiral, we will. And we'll bring everything we've learned from this encounter with us." The threat wasn't delivered with anger or malice, just calm certainty, which somehow made it all the more terrifying. Creth Thorne turned to his second-in-command. "Prepare evacuation protocols. Priority to medical ships and vessels carrying our wounded." "Admiral." The officer blinked in shock. "The Directorate will." "The Directorate will learn from our mistake," Creth Thorne cut him off. "As we should have learned from the failures of the Zorlak Imperium and the Vothran Collective before us." He turned back to the screen. "We accept your terms, Captain Chen." Chen nodded, satisfaction rather than triumph in her expression. "Wise decision, Admiral. We'll transmit safe passage coordinates for your withdrawal. Follow them exactly." "There is one more thing," Creth Thorne said, finding his dignity in defeat. "A question, if you will permit it." "Go ahead." Your people were prepared, not just the military contingencies or the distributed command structure, but psychologically. You adapted to invasion as if you had been expecting it all along. Chen exchanged glances with Hawkins before answering. Humans have been imagining contact with alien civilizations for centuries, Admiral. In our literature, our films, our games, we've simulated first contact thousands of times. And yes, we've imagined invasion scenarios just as often as peaceful ones. You prepared yourselves through entertainment. Krev Thorne couldn't keep the disbelief from his voice. Through imagination, Hawkins corrected. Through asking what if, and then answering that question in 1,000 different ways. Every alien invasion story was a thought experiment. Every post-apocalyptic scenario was a training manual. We've been mentally preparing for this moment since we first looked up at the stars and wondered if we were alone. I see, Krev Thorne said, though he wasn't sure he did, not fully. Then there is nothing more to say. We will withdraw as agreed. One last thing, Admiral, Chen said as he turned to go. When you report back to your directorate, make sure they understand something about humans. And what is that, Captain? We remember. Chen's expression was no longer triumphant or even angry, just deadly serious. We learn. We prepare. And next time, if there is a next time, rule number 1 will still apply. Only we'll be even better at it. The transmission ended, leaving Krev Thorne staring at his own reflection in the darkened screen. Behind him, his officers were already implementing evacuation protocols, coordinating the withdrawal of what remained of the once mighty invasion force. The Admiral's scales shifted slowly from gray to a deep blue of contemplation as he gazed out at the planet below. Still scared from the initial assault, but alive with activity as humans reclaimed their world. Note for the official record, he said quietly. Operation designation. Failed. Primary factor. Fundamental strategic error in species assessment. He paused. Secondary note for the directorate. Recommend classification of Sol system as extreme hazard zone. Indigenous species displays unprecedented adaptability under pressure. Pursuit of diplomatic relations advised over any future military action. He turned away from the viewport. And personal addendum when dealing with humans.